Hi there, my name's Bjorn, and today I want to talk about some alternative ways to use your commander in Magic the Gathering. Commander is the most important card in your deck. For most players, the commander defines the identity of the deck and dictates the entire deck building process. When building a deck, the obvious line of thought, especially for newer players, is to look for a legendary creature you think is cool or strong, make it your commander, and then fill the deck with cards that synergize with that commander. Even if a player chooses an archetype to build as their starting point, the next thing to do is look through popular commanders within that archetype, choose one, and then start scrolling synergies. This is an effective way to quickly and easily build a deck. In a game all about variance, the commander card is the only card you're always guaranteed to have access to. It is your island of predictability in the stormy sea of Lady Luck. Since you know you'll always have access to a specific ability, it makes sense to fill the deck with cards that synergize well with the only card you're guaranteed. This works well, and your deck will likely function as expected. Before I get into things, though, I want to clarify I don't see any issues with building a deck like this. The strategy is both obvious and effective. However, because it's both obvious and effective, players may not consider the alternatives that are out there when it comes to thinking about the command zone. This video is neither a critique of the common method, nor is it a super secret deck tech that's going to blow the minds of your opponents. It's just a humble invitation to look past the first obvious choice and explore some different methods of deck building that I personally have found to be really fun. Before getting into alternatives, I want to explain the most common ways I see commanders being used as setups, payoffs, all-in-ones, and win-mores. Magic is built around the setup and payoff relationship. The relationship's just cause and effect, really. The setup is the cause card, and the payoff is the effect card. Most commonly, I see players choose payoff cards as their commander. After this, they stuff their deck full of setup cards to maximize the value they get from their payoff commander. An example of a payoff commander would be Sithis, Harvest's Hand. Sithis says that whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you gain 1 life and draw a card. Drawing the card and gaining the life are the payoff. Casting an enchantment spell is the required setup. That means that in choosing Sithis as your commander, you're choosing to play a deck that has a lot of enchantments in it to take advantage of the consistent payoff you have waiting in the command zone. This is a fine start to a plan. However, it can also be extremely prescriptive, as it creates an obvious playstyle choice for the player. Fill the deck with setup for the commander's payoff, and there you have it, a new deck. The more specific the setup required is, the more prescriptive the commander is. This prescriptiveness is one of the reasons I started building decks in other ways. It's sort of like writing the last chapter of a book first, and then trying to come up with a story that will lead to that chapter. It does offer guidance and a goal to aim for, but it can also be rather restrictive as the end goal is already determined. Nothing can be added to the story that doesn't work towards the end, and no sub-themes can be added to the deck that don't synergize with the commander. Setup commanders essentially work the same way, but I find them to be a little bit more fun as they are less prescriptive. Rather than giving you a goal to shoot for, they give you some sort of resource to work with, and how you use it is up to you. Atraxa, Praetor's Voice, is an example of a powerful setup commander. Atraxa's ability is simple. At the beginning of your end step, proliferate. Rather than encouraging the player to fill their deck with setup cards to achieve a singular payoff, the player gets to choose what type of payoff they would like to fill the deck with. Personally, I think this commander is more fun because it feels more open-ended. Proliferate hits all kinds of counters. +1/+1, -1/-1, loyalty, poison, rad, stun, and experience counters, just to name a few. A good setup commander enables players to try all sorts of different variations. Opposing players will have a harder time predicting the deck's game plan if the commander is a setup commander rather than a payoff commander, especially if it's very generic setup like Atraxa. All-in-ones are commanders that include both the setup and the payoff on a single card. I'll use Tevel to balance scale as my example. Tevel basically has 3 abilities that all work together. 1 acting as the setup, and 2 working as payoffs. Milling 3 cards on attack is the setup. If this was it, the player would have to figure out how to garner value from it. Should they run Reanimation, Goyfs, Thassa's Oracle win con? There are quite a few options. However, the second ability answers the question for them. They get to return a land to the battlefield. They get both the setup and the value. Honestly, I think this card would be more fun if it just said, when Tevel attacks, return a land from your graveyard to the battlefield. Then the player would have to think about how to get lands in the battlefield. But with these abilities in tandem, they don't have to consider it at all. Rather than being a piece of a cool value engine the player gets to build, it's just an engine all on its own, and I find that pretty boring. Oh, and just in case having both the setup and the payoff wasn't enough value, you also get to make a 2/2 zombie druid whenever a card leaves your graveyard. Add on the fact that this creature is also a 4/4 and has flying, and there just isn't anything else this card needs. It's a value engine all on its own. It doesn't need any other cards whatsoever in order to function and produce value. Players don't have to think about how they'll fill their graveyard, how they'll get things out of their graveyard, how they'll ramp for the late game, how they'll protect their combat craven commander, or where they're going to get blockers and disposable creatures from. Tevil takes care of all of it because he's an all-in-one card. Now, I don't think this is all bad. All that value with little setup frees up a whole lot of deck space to explore more unique gameplay patterns. While the obvious first choice is to play into those strengths, a Tevil deck doesn't actually need to include ramp or additional methods of mill, and it will always have access to a decent beater, as well as lots of bodies on the board. Tevil already does those jobs well, which means the player can fit lots more game plans and synergies into the deck, which could lead to some interesting and unique gameplay experiences. My issue is that the value is so generic and so powerful that the card can just replace older and more unique cards that are similar. At the time Tarkir Dragonstorm was released, I was workshopping a Bracket 2 Sultai discard deck helmed by Damia's Sage of Stone. For fun, I ran a few games where I replaced the commander of the deck with Tevil, just to test out my theory that he did in fact do everything on his own. Unsurprisingly, the deck performed really well. Without even knowing Tevil had existed, I had built a deck that functioned well with him in the command zone. In fact, to my dismay, it ran more consistently with Tevil in the command zone due to just the sheer amount of value he produced. It wasn't so much that Tevil synergized with the deck, but rather that he produced a lot of generic value that any deck running out of the graveyard can work with and succeed with. Generic value's good. Who knew? The question I then had to ask myself was, do I want to make this deck more generic but powerful by changing Tevil to the commander? Or do I want to keep the more unique commander at the cost of the deck being less powerful? In general, this is my gripe with all-in-one commanders. They outperform more unique commanders without really trying. This means most players will ignore older commanders that are more interesting and challenging to build. I do like these commanders when they're used to enable janky creative builds. I don't like these commanders when they homogenize deck building by centralizing power and forcing players to choose between generic value or creativity. I should also add, these are just my personal opinions. A lot of the enjoyment of Magic for me comes from trying to build decks in a new or interesting way that's still functional enough to win a Bracket 2 game. If you enjoy playing powerful generic decks at a higher bracket level, I don't see anything wrong with that. And I hope you don't think I'm talking down to you in this. The last common type of commander that I see is the Win More commander. Now, technically, this is just a type of payoff commander. However, rather than giving a unique payoff, Win More cards just increase the amount of payoff of your other payoff cards. Teysa Karlov, Ishin, Miram, and Torbran are all examples of Win More commanders. They take a normal setup and payoff relationship and pour gasoline on the flames. These commanders can be kind of interesting in the sense that they aren't required for the deck to actually win or function, and they can teach players about using things in the proper time. I'll talk about that idea a little bit later on in the video. Generally though, I see these commanders getting played on curve and essentially just acting as removal tests for the rest of the table. If someone removes it, the Win More player loses. And if someone doesn't remove it, the Win More player quickly outpaces the rest of the board and wins. What do you think? Do the commanders you typically build or see fall into any of these categories? Do you think I'm missing something? Let me know down in the comments. Moving on to the main idea of the video. Here's some different ways to think about your commander and the command zone. A quick disclaimer, these suggestions are purely for creativity and enjoyment purposes. If you're looking for deck techs that are going to blow your opponents out of the water, this isn't the right place to look. However, if you're looking to try something different in how you construct and play your decks, especially ways that may be more challenging, this is the place for you. One fun way to utilize your command zone that isn't just a synergy piece is to utilize it as a free and guaranteed mana ramp spell. Knowing that you'll not only get to ramp, but also knowing what turn you'll get to ramp on and how much you will be ramping means that you can plan out exactly how the deck plays through the earlier turns. Commanders that produce mana and treasures or reduce the cost of spells all fall into this category. While it may not sound fun to build a deck that only uses the commander to ramp early, it frees you up to play more fun stuff in the 99. It's also an excellent way to learn about mana curves. Also, as you can see, many mana ramp commanders have additional text so you can do other things with them too. And yes, Tevil does count as a mana ramp commander, but I don't want to talk about that. I think mana ramp commanders can be overlooked because their abilities are pretty simple and can seem boring. The fun of this, though, is that you get to run a deck with a higher mana curve without having to worry about including a heavy ramp package. This is the mana curve for my mana ramp commander deck. That's right, 25 spells. 1/4 of all the cards in the deck cost 6 or more mana. The most common mana ramp commander, besides Tevil, is Gyada, Font of Hope. Gyada is a 2-drop that can tap for white mana as long as it's used to cast an angel. This ability means that when building your deck, you can essentially ignore the lower portion of your mana curve, and instead load the deck with higher cost creatures. Be honest, who doesn't want to cast more awesome big spells? You can build your deck knowing you'll cast your commander on turn 2, and will have 4 mana on turn 3. That means your mana curve doesn't need to include many other spells that cost 2 or 3 mana. When you have 2 mana, you cast Gyada. After that, you're right on to 4 mana, so no need for 3 mana spells. Mana ramp commanders are fun because of the certainty they provide. As long as you fill your deck with appropriately costed cards to work in tandem with your consistent ramp, you skip over most of the early game cards altogether. Additionally, you can use the commander ramp to cast more expensive ramp spells earlier and push your mana advantage even further. Salubrious Snail has an excellent video about this strategy. One last thing that's nice about mana ramp in the command zone is that once you reach the top end of your mana curve, you stop needing your commander. In other words, your commander is no longer the synergy linchpin that your deck relies on. This means no obvious Achilles heel for your opponent to target, a typical occurrence for many high synergy commanders. Players who use removal on your commander are often wasting it because past turn 5 your commander is no longer important to your game plan. My personal spin on the mana ramp commander comes in the form of my Florian Voldaren Scion deck, named Florian's Flying Fatties. This commander allows you to exile cards and cast 1 based on the amount of life your opponent's lost this turn. Wait a minute, Bjorn, I hear you say. You were talking of mana ramp commanders, and Florian doesn't have a mana ability. Do you take me for a fool? Most certainly not. Please, allow me to justify myself with a long and convoluted backstory. This whole deck was originally made with the express purpose of casting the spell Havoc Festival. I chose Florian because his ability allows you to sift through the entire deck quickly, drastically increasing the chances of playing this lovely card. Originally, the deck was just a bunch of ping damage and a few big dragons and demons that could escalate the amount of damage I dealt and finish out the game. After a while, the ping playstyle got to be really boring. I liked Havoc Festival, and I liked casting the big dragons and demons, but everything else was so uninteresting to me. So I decided to transition the deck into a beatdown deck that played all the big, expensive red and black flyers I could stuff into it. I knew that mana was going to be a big issue. In my search for a commander who could help with covering the cost of all these big boys, I came across the idea of mana ramp commanders, and I realized that the solution to my problem was already in my command zone. Florian could work similarly to a ramp commander, not by producing the mana himself, but by ensuring that I hit ramp and land cards early in the game. Florian only costs 3 mana, and the rest of the cards I want to cast cost 6 or more. That means there are 2 full turns after I cast Florian before I can actually cast a big creature. So what am I supposed to do during those turns? Ramp. Lots of ramp. What I realized is that so long as I can cast Florian on turn 3, I can swing him turn 4 and use his damage trigger to ensure I keep hitting land drops and can cast more ramp spells. The deck runs 39 lands and 15 mana ramp spells that cost 2 or less. The deck needs a mana rock by turn 2 and 3 lands by turn 3. There's an 84% chance of this happening normally, and I can boost those odds by mulliganing with some aggression. The deck really isn't hurt at all by starting with 6 cards. By the way, you can find this calculator and more calculators like it at salubrioussnail.com. The deck's opening turns run like this. Turn 1, play a land and pass. This is a bracket 2 deck. If I wanted to sauce it up, I'd be shooting for some 1 or 0 mana ramp and try to get Florian out turn 2. As it is, this deck doesn't even run a Soul Ring. Turn 2, play another land and a mana rock. Turn 3, play a land and play Florian. If Providence has shined down on me, I'll have drawn a second mana rock, which I can also play here. However, this is only likely to happen about 50% of the time, so I don't actually plan for that. Turn 4, I use Florian's ability to filter for another mana rock. In the best case scenario, I'm able to cast 2 of them this turn. Worst case scenario, I miss a land drop and have to use Florian's ability to hit the land drop instead. Most of the time, however, I'm able to end turn 4 with 4 lands and 2 mana rocks, which means on turn 5, I'm untapping with a minimum of 6 mana. And if I hit another land drop, 7 mana. From turn 5 onward, I can cast my big boys, which only continues to fuel Florian's ability and snowball into more swinging power on the board. Since Florian doesn't have a mana ability, I do have to include a ramp package, which takes up space in the deck. However, since the deck is designed to completely ignore 3, 4, and 5 mana cost spells, I'm able to make up for the lost deck space and still run 25 cards, which are 6 mana or more. Florian isn't a true mana ramp commander. I know, but the entire game plan of the deck was inspired by the mana ramp commander idea. Pick a commander that helps you consistently hit ramp early so you can ignore cheaper spells and confidently build a very greedy mana curve. Even if it isn't pure mana production, building a deck this way helped me understand mana curves and game plans much better, which led to me constructing better overall decks. I hope this gives you inspiration to try some sort of mana ramp commander. I hope you have fun with puzzling out the mana curve and the gameplay that comes along with building it properly. The next different way to utilize your commander is the counterweight commander. Rather than doing the typical synergy commander relationship, the counterweight commander works in sort of an opposite fashion. A counterweight commander takes into consideration not what the 99 is already doing well, but rather what it doesn't have. Commander is used to balance out the 99 rather than to work in tandem with it. It's important that your commander isn't covering up a major weakness so much as it's adding tangential game plans and flexibility. It's not a good idea for your commander to be your only card draw or your only control spell. Typically, I like to choose a commander with some big stats or a big splashy effect. a commander that doesn't need to be on the board for a very long time to do its job. The two counterweight commanders I'm currently using are Sauron, Lord of the Rings, and Damia, Sage of Stone. I'm not going to talk about the Damia deck as an example today, though, because, full disclosure, it's kind of buns. I've been building and rebuilding this commander for a couple years now, trying to cultivate some sort of vibe, and while I feel like I'm close to it, it's just not there yet. Instead, I'll use my Sauron Lord of the Rings deck to explain my more successful counterweight deck. Sauron is an 8-mana Grixis Avatar Horror. He has Power Toughness 9/9 and Trample. When he is cast, you make a 5/5 Orc army, mill 5 cards, and return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. Talk about making an immediate effect. Sauron Lord of the Rings was the face commander of the Hosts of Mordor Precon, which I bought a while back because it was on sale at Costco for like $45. The Precon had quite a bit going on, but mainly focused on reanimating big splashy creatures, amassing a big orc army, and casting expensive sorceries. The deck was fun, but due to its very high mana curve and multiple game plans, it was pretty inconsistent and could take a long time to actually get rolling. The deck also felt quite reliant on Sauron to make that big play to win the game, but he was so expensive that you could really only use him once. Overall, I had quite a few games that felt like I just couldn't do anything. I thought Sauron was really cool as a lone card. He's big, he's in your face, he's got a splashy effect. However, he's also redundant, an expensive splashy commander at the helm of a deck full of expensive splashy creatures. So, I decided I could build a deck that would be able to utilize Sauron, but didn't actually require him to win. Sauron works well as a counterweight for a couple of reasons. First off, he doesn't require any other synergies to be effective, which means the deck doesn't need to be built around him. This is good because it frees up the rest of the deck to be whatever it wants to be. Second, all of Sauron's effects occur on cast. Even if an opponent counters your commander, you still get a 5/5, you still mill, and you still reanimate. Even though the deck doesn't always need Sauron's abilities, it's good to know that when it is needed, it will be there. Third, at 8 mana, he doesn't really clog up the mana curve. I don't have to build the curve of my 99 around him at all. He's the top end. Also, I don't constantly have to be comparing him to the other cards in my hand and trying to decide which is better to cast at this point in time. Overall, Sauron provides a reliable and immediate board presence that can quickly close out a game all on its own. This role is both specific and valuable. However, it is not essential. The deck doesn't need to be built around what Sauron's trying to do in order to win, and Sauron doesn't need the 99 to be functioning to do his thing. I think this valuable but not essential relationship is the key to building a counterweight commander deck. So what does the rest of the deck do? The 99 functions as an aristocrat's deck early in the game, setting up sacrifice engines to draw cards and produce mana. Much like a certain Dark Lord built up and sacrificed many of his minions to create his engines of war. Once an economy has been established, the deck seeks to expand its influence outwards and control its opponents. It bends the will of opposing creatures to its own before sacrificing them to its machinations. That's right, this is a threatened deck, and a thematic slam dunk if I do say so myself. The deck actually really just wants to steal as much as possible from its opponents. Beyond the threatened pieces, there are cards for stealing artifacts, draws, cards from graveyards, cards from decks, and even entire turns. One of my favorite things to do with this deck is see how many Soul Rings I can get control of at once, because, Lord of the Rings. So far, my record's 3. The threatened game plan works well because it allows me to control down opponents at the same time that I'm building up my own board state and economy. It also comes with the benefit of being able to swing opponents' creatures at other opponents, which can pressure life totals and remove blockers for the entire turn cycle, leaving them defenseless for up to 3 more turns. The deck generally wins through building a large economy while controlling down opponents. Essentially, it outlasts them. There are a few very expensive top-end spells that can close out the game, like Rise of the Dark Realms, Insurrection, Mutinous Massacre, Too Greedily, Too Deep, and Nicol Bolas, Planeswalk. These cards all can end a game outright. However, if they don't win quickly, they're likely to be followed up by board wipes from my opponents, leaving everyone with empty boards and low life totals, and a game that's threatening to stretch out for a lot longer. Only I had access to some big stompy creature that could put a few extra bodies back on the board. Overall, using the counterweight commander building strategy, I was able to build one of my favorite decks to play, and use a commander who I think is so cool, but just not strong enough to be the centerpiece of his own deck. Just remember, it's important for your counterweight commander to be valuable, but not imperative to your game plan. Another fun way to use a commander in a different way is the deck's Plan A dedicated finisher. These are the kind of commanders that just end the game if they're played at the right time. Now, obviously, putting your win condition in the command zone does telegraph your game plan to your opponents, which puts you at risk of being counterplayed. However, that's the fun of this kind of deck. You have to have some finesse with your timing. If you just try and cast these commanders willy-nilly, you'll find them countered, exiled, tapped, bounced, and every other method of control imaginable. Your opponents aren't dumb, so you can't be either. When building a deck like this, it's a good idea to also have a backup plan or two, as well as some redundancies built in. Also, you can prevent your commander from eating a continual stream of removal spells by adding in some protection spells of some sort to ensure they actually hit the board. While that may sound annoying to some of you, I find that challenge and the learning that comes along with it to be worthwhile. The purest example of a deck like this that I've seen is my brother's Vihan Goldwaker deck. Vihan gives all outlaws vigilance and haste, and much more importantly in this case, turns all of your treasures into 3/3 assassins. The deck focuses purely on creating as many treasures as possible before slamming Vihan and knocking players out. It's quite effective, and even though he only costs 3 mana, Vihan doesn't come out until the table is ripe for the kill. My own version of a finisher commander deck is my Evergreen Stacks deck, helmed by Odric Lunarch Marshal. At the beginning of combat, Odric gives all my creatures vigilance, if at least one creature that I control has vigilance. The same follows for Death Touch, Double Strike, Trample, Menace, and just about every other combat keyword you can think of. I learned very quickly that although he's only 4 mana, Odric really shouldn't be cast on turn 4. When I would do that, he would get smoked instantly, well before I could assemble a board that he could actually utilize. This deck forced me to learn more about patience and timing, waiting until opponents are tapped out or low on cards, or just can't be bothered to spend removal on me and my cards at this time. While I'm definitely not perfect in this regard, I've really noticed that I've gotten better at waiting for the right time to strike, rather than just dumping my hand on the table every opportunity I get. The last method I want to suggest trying is just building the 99 of your deck without even considering the commander whatsoever. I know, that sounds really dumb to ignore the one guaranteed card you have, and also the namesake of the entire format, but hear me out. When you build a deck, it's really hard not to let the commander warp the identity of the deck to its image. And to be fair, it should. The command zone is a huge advantage, and if power is your chief concern, centering the deck around a strong commander is a must. In my experience, though, building without a commander feels very freeing. I think oftentimes we can have a deck idea, and then through the building process, we can end up straying pretty far from the original idea in order to make the deck work with the commander. Just building the 99 frees the player to truly explore what they're capable of, and what a deck can really be. So where do you start your deck building if you aren't going to be starting with the commander? I started with 2 cards that I wanted to play for a long time, but had never found a good place for: Axis of Mortality and Evra, Halcyon Witness. I found the idea of swapping life totals really funny, and I liked the idea of setting my own life total to 4 using Evra before giving that 4 life to another player. Choosing a card or combo of cards that are in the 99 that the deck is built around is sometimes called playing a hidden commander. In this case, my Evra/Axis combo would be my hidden commander. Usually the hidden commander isn't in the command zone because it's not allowed via the legend rule like Taminoa or Sunforger. Both these cards have powerful effects that an entire deck can be built around, so long as the player can actually get them on board. In the case of my John Arenicus deck, John Arenicus is not in the command zone for color fixing reasons. The deck needed green mana and spells pretty badly, so I chose a Sultai commander instead. But I've already made a whole other video about that deck. If you want more information about it, you can check it out. With my Axis Evra combo in mind, I began thinking about problems I would face and then allowing the deck to grow naturally, without the guiding lines of a commander. Like with any hidden commander deck, I knew getting Axis of Mortality on board would be tough to do consistently. While there are a few other cards that have similar effects, they're either non-repeatable or crazy mana expensive. I decided it'd be better to include a host of tutors as well as a healthy draw suite. And since I already wanted my life total to get low so I could swap it, I specifically chose draw spells and engines that would allow me to trade life for cards. If you build a hidden commander deck, lots of card draw or tutors is pretty non-optional. The more important the hidden cards are to your game plan, the more card draw and tutors you should play. Even with having to include a tutor suite, I was still left with a lot of space in the deck to fill. I knew that if my life swap strategy worked, I'd still be left with players at 4 life that needed to be finished off. I also figured it'd be a good idea to have an alternative game plan in case my main pieces got removed, countered, or I just couldn't commit all my resources to playing them. So I added a burn suite, cards that incrementally lower life totals throughout the game, as well as a few bigger burn cards that could deal big damage and finish off an opponent quickly. The deck was really coming together, but early playtests revealed 2 issues. I lost life very quickly, and I often didn't have the blockers to protect my fragile life total until I could swap it. The solution? Cards like Soul Warden and Daxos to gain bits of life early, and some big life-linking creatures that offered both great defensive and offensive capabilities, like Asterion, Vona, Liesa, and Lycia. With these changes, the 99 felt very cohesive, and I was really happy with the outcome. It drew lots of cards, could manipulate its life total in both directions fairly easily, and had multiple methods of closing out a game. The tutor suite I originally included to find Axis of Mortality turned out to be way more useful because now the deck could switch between its multiple offensive and defensive game plans as needed. Because the deck has so many game plans and isn't absolutely reliant on the Axis Evra combo, I struggled to classify it as a true hidden commander deck, which is why I titled this section Just Build the 99. The way I see it, the main difference between a hidden commander deck and just building the 99 of a deck is how reliant your deck is on playing out any specific card or combination of cards, which is really more of a spectrum than a dichotomy. Hidden commander or not, these two strategies are pretty similar, so I'm lumping them together. At this point in the deck building process, the only remaining issue I still had was figuring out the commander. It's not uncommon for hidden commander decks to run tutors in the command zone, but I already had tutors and card draw built in. My deck also felt like it had a pretty strong Gothic vibe going, and I wanted a commander that went along with it. There were a handful of Orzhov cards already in my 99 that I felt would work nicely and provide good value in some way or another, but I really liked the red cards I had included, and I wasn't about to get rid of them to make the deck fit with a commander. Also, I'm going to address it right now because I can hear you all screaming, "What about Mr. Negative? He's perfect. I can't believe you're talking about a life swap deck and not talking about Mr. Negative." Fine, I'll tell you, geez. First, I started on this deck before the Spider-Man set dropped, so I didn't even know about him until the deck was finished. Second, like I already said, I really liked the red cards in the deck, and I wasn't about to cut them to make the deck fit a commander, even one that fit thematically very well. Third, I built this deck specifically because I wanted to play Axis of Mortality, so putting a similar effect in the command zone felt like it wouldn't really be doing the card justice. Fourth, at this point, I also wasn't very stoked about the Spider-Man set, and I didn't really want to buy any of the cards from it. Ironically, my wife, who has no desire to care or know anything about Magic, went to a game store and asked for card recommendations from the store clerk so she could get me cards for my birthday. One of the cards he recommended her was Mr. Negative. So despite my objections to it, I did actually end up with a copy of Mr. Negative in the 99, out of respect for my sweet wife and how far she went out of her comfort zone for me. Within the Mardu colors, there were a handful of options I considered. The two that I considered closest were Gen, Arcanum Weaver, and Lycia, Sanguine Tribute. I thought Gen seemed pretty neat as a general concept, and my deck did center around an enchantment. But I felt his ability was too niche, and I would really have to change the deck a lot to make him have any but the fringest case of uses. Lycia was the strongest consideration, and I figured that she could play a similar role to Sauron and just act as a big beater to rely on in the endgame. However, I didn't think the deck had enough life gain to actually rely on dropping her cost consistent. On top of this, the deck is centered around a 6-mana enchantment that needs to be tutored out, so I wanted something less mana intensive in the command zone. Also, since this deck wants to survive to the late game and assemble an expensive combo, a threatening aggro commander like Lycia would probably alter how people looked at the deck. They might expect me to cheat her out quickly and aggro them out, prompting them to try to take me out quickly before that happened. I wanted something a little more unassuming in the command zone, so I chose Mathis Fiendseeker. Mathis is a 3/3 with Menace, who puts bounty counters on opponents' creatures. Whenever a creature with a bounty counter on it dies, each other player draws a card and gains 2 life. I chose Mathis for a couple reasons. One, he's unassuming. His ability is unimpressive. I'm fine with this, however, because he isn't that important to the deck, and it keeps people from guessing my game plan right away. They also don't see him as much of a threat, which helps me keep in good graces of the table. Even when players have voiced their concerns that I'm going to be playing Kill Spell the deck, an idea that would turn most players against me, it's easy for me to point out that even if I was doing that, that means that they'd be getting free card draw and life gain whenever I removed their opponent's stuff, which is a pretty tantalizing offer. Reason number 2 is that I like the idea of having a way for my opponents to gain some life, since my deck runs so much burn. 2 life seems unimportant early in the game, but as life totals drop into single digits, it becomes much more tempting. Mathis provides a little bit of a carrot that can be used politically, especially further into games when hand sizes are diminished and life totals have eked away. It's nothing crazy, but bounty counters can often be the deciding factor when an opponent is deciding between removing my cards or another opponent's. The extra bit of politics Mathis can add, especially in a really casual game, is pretty fun. Reason 3 is that Mathis provides a bit of passive value without requiring much investment on my part. It's usually easy to figure out which creatures are not long for the board and put bounty counters on them. And while it isn't huge value, a 3-mana investment early in the game can end up drawing me 3 to 5 cards throughout. This is especially handy for bouncing back from board wipes, as all those creatures dying refills my hand. The last reason is just the novelty. I haven't seen anyone I know play Mathis, and I like running commanders people haven't seen. I don't think I would ever build a Mathis-centered deck since his ability is really quite subpar. But since this deck was built to not care about its commander, it gives me a way to play something a little weird in the command zone without fully committing to it. Despite having a commander who can go games at a time without being cast, this is one of my most consistent and fun to play decks. Focusing only on the 99, hidden commander or not, and letting the deck grow naturally without the constraints of fitting cards to a commander helped me make the 99 much more cohesive than normal. It also feels like games are really different because there isn't a dead ringer of a card sitting in the command zone, homogenizing my gameplay experience. I'll fully admit, getting distracted too much by the commander when deck building might be more of a personal flaw rather than a universal experience, but I wanted to throw the idea out and see what you guys thought of it. Personally, building a deck in this way proved to be both fun and refreshing for me, and I'd suggest it to anyone who's feeling like their games are all the same. Well, there you have it. A few different ways to think about the command zone the next time you build a deck. We talked about using your commander to mana ramp, counterweight commanders, finishers in the command zone, just building the 99, and hidden commanders. Have you heard of any of these methods before? Maybe you've built a deck using one of these strategies and didn't even realize it. I'd love to hear about the different ways you've found to use the command zone. I also would love to hear if any of these ideas have inspired you to go out and build a new deck. Anyways, thanks for watching and have a great day.